When should you upgrade your axles on your off-road vehicle, and what are some things to consider when you're doing that upgrade? Well, who better to talk with than Jim from Dynatrack, and that's what we're going to dive into on this episode of Coffee One Take. Stay tuned. Welcome to TrailRecon, I'm Brad, and today I'm here at the Dynatrack facility with Jim, and we're going to take a deep dive into axles. Jim, I know you're a busy guy, man. Thank you for taking the time to talk today.
Pleasure. Look forward to it. Always like to give out good information to people.
Yeah, I have a list of questions that I think I had early on about axles, and I know that a lot of viewers out there. So I want to talk about some of the specifics out there that I think is not general knowledge and dive into it. But before we do that, you and I went out to Death Valley last year and had a blast out there. When are we going to do that again?
Well, it's coming into the season, isn't
it?
Yeah, it is. Out there. We better start planning it today.
I want to get back out to Death Valley with you.
There's a whole bunch of other things that we didn't hit that we can hit too.
Yeah, guys, if you don't know, Jim knows the inside and out of Death Valley, and you took us to some amazing spots out there.
It's a great place.
I'm looking forward to going back out
there. Especially for an off-road vehicle and to go exploring and see things. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have never joined us for an episode of Coffee One Take, we don't edit here, so we're just letting the camera roll and just see where the conversation takes us. So I think the biggest question for me was, when is it time to upgrade my axles? I mean, I bought a Jeep Rubicon and I put 35s on there, but when do you know it's the right time to upgrade those axles?
So let's just start with your situation, because really the stock axles in a Rubicon have lockers. They're a good quality piece, and you had 35-inch tires. Yeah. The other thing is you were kind of a beginner.
Right.
And so, generally speaking, beginners have more self-control. In fact, if anything, they're just being more careful, right? Than people who've been out a whole bunch of times.
Sure.
However, even with 35s and a moderately built vehicle, or in terms of physical weight, you can still get into mishaps. Mm-hmm. You're going a little too fast. Your attention gets taken away. There's that bump in the road, and bam, you hit that really hard. Yeah. And you bend a housing. JKs and JLs are known for that. There's either issues with bent housings or bent axle flanges. These are common things. And they're not necessarily because you're abusive. It's just because you're out having a good time, and you just happen to look at a burrow over here on the side, and you hit something.
Right.
It happens to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? So insulating yourself from those kind of mishaps is a reason to upgrade axles. Now, if you're super careful and you know I'm never going to look at that burrow, then you can wait a little bit. I think once you break past 35s and you're going for 37s, and these days people want to go to 40s. There's so many. It's like 40s are the new 37s. Then you really need to get serious about doing something.
Yeah.
The stock axles are designed to keep the weight of the vehicle down, keep the greenhouse gas emissions under control, get good fuel economy to keep the government happy. So they have all these terrible constraints that they have to deal with, and also keep the price of the vehicle down and make a fair profit. So people ask, well, why don't they just put better axles in from the beginning? Well, because it would mess up all those other requirements.
Sure.
But once you cross that 37-inch tire threshold, or you're doing more difficult trails, or you're out a lot more often. You're out monthly instead of once a year. And you're not just going on that fire road that goes to the campground that's already got a bathroom and a shower and running water. You're going somewhere remote, and you're going to spend some time out there. Then you need to start thinking about these things, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're out in the middle of nowhere, you do have something happen, you break an axle or something like that. And you're spending time working on the Jeep.
Yeah. For me, things started breaking over time, right? Because we were, put a few miles off road doing that, and so some of the, control arm brackets were breaking, and track bar brackets were breaking, and we were, wheeling off the trail with straps keeping us all together. And then I remember when we did the Prorock 44 upgrade, we looked at them side by side, and you're like, oh yeah, that thing's bent. I was like, oh okay, I probably waited a little long.
And that you're not alone. I mean, that's a very common path for people that get their first Jeep.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful that I did that upgrade. It was actually one of the best upgrades I think I've done on the vehicle. It's peace of mind knowing that I've got that Prorock 44 up there. We just did the 60 in the rear, which has been awesome. But let me ask, as somebody that's trying to decide on what to do, how do you determine what are the pros and cons of going with the 44 or the 60 up front, and a 60 or bigger in the rear? What are some of the things to think about?
So it gets down to how much gear you're carrying in the car, how fast you're planning on driving, how harsh the trails are. If you can do really severe obstacles, then you probably need bigger axles in the front. Now, we've got some upgrades coming out for the Prorock 44, so we actually were just at Off-Road Expo, and we're going to be equipping our Prorock 44, because we find the gear section in the Prorock housing is very stiff, very strong. The front gears are doing really well, but it's the U-joints in the axle shaft. A lot of people will upgrade to constant velocity joints for something from RCV, for example, but sometimes that's more expense than they want. So we're going to offer an option where you can have the Dana 60 shaft with the 1480 joints in your Prorock 44.
Nice.
That's an upgrade that you could probably come back for down the road.
Okay.
We see a lot of improvements that we're going to be making to Prorock 44s going forward. We're going to do our best to make those as retrofittable to existing people, because we have so many customers with Prorock 44s, and so we're going to work on those goals. And so we got more stuff coming.
Okay. So if I'm first time calling up and I'm like, I want to upgrade my front axle, I want to do a 44 or 60. What are some of the key things you would I need to consider before I choose one or the other?
Cost.
Okay.
So if you do a 60 up front, you're going to need to do a 60. You got to do them both.
Okay.
So it's a big bite at one time.
Got it.
Whereas if you do the Prorock 44, it's not nearly as big of a step up front. You get a lot of benefit, a lot of value in terms of durability and confidence to explore when you go out there.
Okay.
So when you go up to 60, you're adding in a whole lot of other costs. Tire, wheels, changing wheels, drive shafts front and rear, more installation costs. You're probably going to go with a more sophisticated suspension system. It's just a bigger build. Yeah. So it's an order of magnitude higher. The progression I see most people do is the Prorock 44 up front, and then they kind of, what do I do in the rear? I don't want to upgrade to 8-lug wheels, and then that's why we have the new ProFloat XD60.
Yeah, which I love.
Which you just got.
Yeah, it's just peace of mind, more peace of mind, and we're going to go get after it on some trails.
And it's designed to do that, so you can get rough with it, and not have to worry.
Yeah. Now the 5-lug versus the 8-lug 60. There's a lot of differences. Can you talk about some of those differences and why you may want to choose one over the other?
For most of the people that are doing overlanding and with a Jeep or a Toyota, we went to 8-lug because the Dana 60s of days gone by came with. Yeah. And we just evolved from that. But unless you're carrying, unless you think your Jeep is going to weigh 8,000 pounds or more, which is highly unlikely, then really 8-lug wheel isn't really giving you that much of a benefit.
Okay.
Now, the 5-lug patterns of the earlier days had 1/2-inch studs. Some of them even had 7/16 wheel studs, super tiny. So now we're up to 14mm wheel studs, which are comparable to 9/16. And so the ProFloat and the Prorock 44s, we're going to be setting out there with the 14mm studs going forward. So with the bigger wheel stud, the 5-on-5 pattern, it's really good enough. It's a great setup. If you're going to go racing with it, then I'd say 8-lug, right? If you're going to do all the crazy trails like you see guys doing on YouTube, then okay, 8-lug's for you. But that's because you want that 60 up front and maybe even that 80 Prorock 80 in the rear. Yeah. And so that would be a customer that would be a great candidate for 8 on 6.5.
If you're just going to go hit it hard every time you go out on the trail.
The other thing is wheel choice. So a lot of people complain to me that they don't like the 8-lug wheels that are available to them. They have the 5-lug wheel that they either bought because they loved it to begin with, they want to keep it, or even if they are up to changing wheels because they want to do something different, there's just more styles, more sizes, more backspacing choices, more offset choices. So 5-lug wheel has got a lot of advantages to it.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, to buy new wheels is an expense. It's an additive,
you're going to spend, if you want, especially if you want beadlocks, you're going to spend $450 a wheel or more. Yeah. and then you've got 5 of them, right? Because you're going to have a spare.
Yeah.
And then you got mounting and balancing, and balancing a real bead lock is going to cost more than just a regular tire.
For sure.
Not to mention that you might not want just anybody to do that for you. I mean,
sure.
if it's not done properly, it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
So I personally prefer to do all my own bead lock installations myself.
Yeah.
For that reason.
And it's a lot of labor though to do that.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. That's an interesting point about the wheels and back spacing, because that matters. But there's also the axle width.
Right.
And so you guys, for the Jeep specifically, sell a standard width axle and one that's 3 inches wider.
Right.
Why do I want to consider something that's 3 inches wider? What's the benefit of that?
We started doing that because a lot of the other aftermarket suspensions are. Silence my phone here. Oops.
Oops. All good.
So a lot of the suspension kits that were coming out were long travel, coilover kits, and basically there was no room really for the tire to articulate way up into that space without crashing into those shock absorbers.
Okay.
So it was really driven by the need to get more wheel travel from those kits.
Okay.
And we've had customers that have bought those kits, installed them in their Jeeps, and had lots of rubbing issues, and we've been able to solve those with the wider axles.
Okay, all right. I like
also,
that.
too, the fact that our 1550 wheel end assembly has that real short scrub radius, more so than any other axle. So the tire's doing more pivoting than it is rolling forward and backward, which also helps create tire clearance when you're stuffing one tire up in the car.
You mentioned something I think is super important, that's scrub radius.
Mm-hmm.
How when I upgrade my axles, and is scrub radius, why is that so important?
Well, when you're going into an obstacle, I'm a proponent of, if you think you need a locker in that obstacle, then turn it on and make sure it's engaged before you get into the obstacle, whether it's a mud hole or a rock crawl or whatever. A lot of people get in there and then they can't get the locker to engage because the locker needs a little bit of movement to get itself fully engaged. Well, once it's engaged, now it's like a solid axle all the way across. So when you're steering, one tire, when you turn this way, this tire has to turn further and more revolutions than this tire compared to this tire. So when it's locked up, it won't do that. So you really feel, I can't really steer a maneuver. So that short scrub radius does a few things for you. It increases your maneuverability in obstacles. It reduces a lot of the steering loads and forces on the linkage, the drag link, and the tie rod. It also reduces all your braking forces because when you slam on the brakes, those tires aren't trying to pull themselves backward anymore. They're just stopping. Right. So there's just a lot of advantage to it, and that's why we came out with that 1550 wheel end. Yeah. It's got scrub radius that's more comparable to the stock 44 than it does a lot of the 60s that are out there. Right. So we've made great advances in terms of reducing that scrub radius, which increases, makes the handling better, maneuverability better. Right. It also takes load off your steering. It's just a better setup.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about that when they're upgrading their wheels and tires, and they're looking at offset and back spacing, and then they're throwing a 1 1/4 inch spacer in there.
Yep.
That's changing all of those.
Changing all those things in the wrong direction.
Right, in the wrong direction.
A lot in the wrong direction.
Maybe they can now fit that tire, but now their steering is off, the handling's off, and so I mean, I've run spacers in the past because I had to. I'm glad I don't have to do it anymore.
I mean, you can get away with it a lot of things, but is it really the right way to go?
Yeah.
Not really.
No. Yeah. Okay. This is a great question. Semi-float versus full float. Can you explain what the two differences are and why it's important? Why should I care about one or the other?
So full float was originally designed for vehicles that carry a lot of weight. We just happened to adapt that because back in the day when we were starting to look for bigger and stronger axles for 4x4s, we were working on 3/4 ton trucks. So if you had a 1/2 ton truck, you wanted 3/4 ton axles in it, and they were all full float by definition because they were designed to be in a pickup truck that carries payload, and it's supposed to. And it does. It carries the weight a lot better because the weight of the vehicle rests on the housing, which has a spindle formed on the end of it, not the axle shaft. With a semi-float, basically you have all the weight of the vehicle on the axle shaft and on the single bearing that's in there, and that's how it is stocked from the factory. And it's just, you also don't have as strong of a shaft. So the shaft has to do two jobs. It has to support the weight of the vehicle. It also has to rotate the tire. And when you add these bigger tires, you kind of exacerbate the forces on that axle shaft. So that's why we did the ProFloat. ProFloat has two bearings in there, and it's designed in such a way so that that axle is held in a more rigid state. The flange is a lot stronger, and the axle, can't move around, it can't bend.
Right.
So it's got structure, not just more metal holding it. The structure is oftentimes more valuable than just adding material. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what about? You always hear about high pinion. I mean, high pinion is a huge advantage, which I want you to explain. But why isn't everything just high pinion? Why is that even a conversation we have?
So the gear cut on a high pinion axle is opposite than it is on a standard cut rear axle. So people don't always realize that it's not just that the pinion's higher. When you put a high pinion in the front, well, actually, ring gear teeth have a strong side and a weaker side.
Okay.
So when you're driving in the forward direction, you want the tooth to be pushing on the stronger side. So when you put a high pinion in the rear, now you're by default pushing on the weaker side of the ring gear. So instead of the gears trying to mesh tighter together, they're trying to push themselves apart. If you don't have a housing that's rigid enough to overcome that, then you're going to have more gear problems. The other thing is if you're pulling a lot of weight, or you're turning a really much bigger tire and you're doing a lot of high speed, then from a durability standpoint, the standard cut low pinion in the rear has more strength advantages than the high pinion. But in the front, it's the opposite. You want high pinion in the front.
Okay.
It's more preferred, and that's why it was developed. Because back before say 1977, all 4x4s had low pinion fronts, and they were pushing on the weaker side of the ring gear. And then as things developed, then they realized that the higher pinion, by moving the pinion above axle centerline, they could push on the stronger side of the ring gear. Okay. And that's how high pinion really started. And that was in the late 70s.
Okay, this is some good knowledge. You guys getting all this? This is some good stuff, man. I'm learning a few things. This is awesome, Jim. Okay. Let's talk about splines for a second, because you always hear people talk about, I got these axle splines. And I know when I first got my Jeep, I had to go look that up. Like, I didn't really understand what that meant. Explain to everybody, why are axle splines important, and what does that really mean?
So the splines are serrations on the end of the axle shaft that engage female serrations on the differential. And so you want to have enough of those serrations to prevent those teeth from being stripped off.
Right.
But more importantly, you want a big enough axle shaft that's going to be able to transmit the torque from all your gear reduction from the engine back. So that's the engine torque. Let's say that's 400 pound-feet times the torque converter, which doubles it, to first gear, which might triple it. And so the progression of that torque multiplication as you get to the rear end gets higher and higher and higher. And so when we put our four-wheel drives in low range, we're adding a whole lot more gear reduction, which multiplies that torque even more. And then when you stand the vehicle up in a situation where more weight is on the back tire, you're just pushing all the parts to extreme. So we've just found that a 35 spline, 1.5-inch diameter axle shaft is kind of the standard of today. We also offer on our Prorock 80, that comes standard with an 1.75-inch 40 spline. So as the shaft gets bigger, we're adding more splines to, because we have to in order to make it fit the differential that we got.
So a stock Jeep JL, what's the spline axle what's that come
in a JL 32.
32. And so you're giving a 35, and then up to.
But we're also going to a bigger shaft.
Bigger shaft. Yep. So the teeth, there's a little more meat.
There's more serrations. It's bigger around.
Yeah.
So we put more serrations to cover that space.
Got it.
And so the tooth count is really not as valuable as the shaft diameter itself. We're just increasing the tooth count to just make it proportional to the diameter of the shaft that we're using.
Okay. That was something that I did initially with my Jeep. Was I replaced the axle shaft. So we didn't do the whole housing.
Right.
I was replacing brackets, and then it was the shafts, and then it was C-gussets. That was kind of the progression I went through before we just finally did the whole axle. And I think a lot of people do the same thing. And after we did the Prorock 44, I was like, man, it would have just so much simpler just to go right into that. I would have saved a lot of headache and time and money. But axle shafts what type of axle shafts do you guys use in your axles?
So we make a lot of those shafts ourselves, and so we make them out of different types of steel for different applications. But the predominant material these days is chromoly steel,
Okay.
and that's really well known in the industry as being strong. You can heat treat it to a very high strength. The material itself, when it's not heat treated, isn't really any stronger than anything else. But it has alloys in it that allow you to make it harder and stronger and more resilient and tougher.
And when should I ever carry extra axle shafts with me?
You know, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. In fact, I would tell you that the majority of my customers who requested spare shafts with their axle, most of the time have never used them.
Okay.
And they tend to just get rusty and beat up, and you know, you can use them in a pinch, but I think if you've sized the axle correctly for what you want to do, you're not going to need to worry about that.
Okay. What about anything I should carry, like U-joints?
Yeah, oh yeah, I think U-joints make sense. That's either small,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, oh yeah, no, that's super easy. And maybe a yoke, you know, a pinion yoke.
Okay.
Because if you ram that into a rock or something like that, you know, you can't, you know, reconnect your drive shaft, that might be a good idea.
Okay. What about general maintenance for your axle? What kind of thing? Now I've upgraded to, you know, the 44 in the front. I got the 60 in the rear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every few months, what should I be thinking about doing with that
You
axle?
really don't need to do much.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. So, you know, I think you always want to look at things.
Sure.
Obviously, if you see a leak, you got to pay attention to that. So I think scanning for leaks is simple. Even if it's a new axle, or you can always drive into some mud and get a lot of grit in there, and it can tear up a seal. So look for that kind of thing before it gets too bad. The other thing, don't always ignore seal leaks. You know, so seal leaks can be a symptom of a bearing. You know, bearings do fail. I mean, they you know, the factory plots them on a curve, and that bell curve is that, you know, ones at this far end and that far end are going to fail out sooner than the ones in the middle. That's just the way it works. So you size bearings; they're very reliable. It's rare, but it does happen.
Okay, well that's nice to know. All right, one last question for you. The Prorock 80, that's the big beef. I mean, if I'm going to a 40-inch tire or 42, is that when I need to start thinking about?
Yeah, I think so. I do. Yeah, so we started doing the Prorock 80 because we started to see just, you know, the real top-end guys able to break the gear of a Dana 60. And so we did a lot of work to make our housings more rigid. We did a lot of work to make our overall housing structure strong enough to complement the gear set, and so it wouldn't break. But you reach that point where you see the teeth are being ripped out at the roots, and it's just like, hey, there's nothing wrong, nothing defective here. It's just been overcome.
Yeah.
And so the Prorock 80 gives you an 11.25-inch gear.
Okay.
It also has bigger bearings, and then one other thing that was really important is it has a much bigger pinion shank, because we saw some guys that were just able to twist the pinion shanks right off, and so they weren't having ring gear failures, they were having pinion shank failures. So the Prorock 80 solved all that. The challenge at the time was, though, it's a big monster housing and it weighs a ton. So we had to work hard on the Prorock 80 to get its weight down, its ground clearance up, and have it be a good package that would fit in a Jeep vehicle.
So you've just mentioned quite a few breakages that you've seen on the trail. Are there any over the many years that you've been out there wheeling that just stick out to you, like how did this happen, like axles and major breakages that you've seen on the trail from stock vehicles or upgraded vehicles?
Yeah. Well, you can even see stuff on YouTube today. I mean, you know, we've seen, you know, JLs and Gladiators just, you know, with fractured front axle disconnect housings. It just
they're like this. Like they probably jumped it or something, right?
Well, yeah, I guess. You know, I wasn't there, so every customer always says the same thing. I was just going to church. I don't know what happened. You know? I mean, it was perfect. I was just backing out of the driveway and it just fell apart. Right?
Yeah.
So, but there was always something. So, you know, metal fails. It works and it works and it works until it fails.
Right.
And so if you fatigue it and abuse it long enough, eventually you're going to cut into those safety margins and potentially have something break like that.
Yeah. We haven't had any catastrophic breakages on our trips. Usually it's been enough that we've been able to limp home or limp off the trail. But I think that comes down to how you wheel. And like you started off by saying, you know, if you're going to just go race it, if you're going to go rock crawl really hard, then that stuff's eventually going to happen, right? But if you're easy on the gas pedal and you're mindful of your line and, you know, you're not just hammering it hard.
I think it's just respect for your vehicle.
Yeah.
That's really what it gets down to. And as you get more experience and as you know more, so for me, you know, when I'm driving a vehicle, I can really think about where forces are going
Yeah.
and what I'm doing to them. But most people don't obviously think that hard about it. They
Right.
just drive it.
Yeah. Well, Jim, man, this has been a really rich conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
A lot of knowledge up in there about axles. You've been doing this for a minute.
Couple times.
Okay. So when are we going to Death Valley? When is that trip happening?
Oh, I think it's going to have to be probably January, February-ish.
You guys heard it.
Something like that.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for getting on camera and doing this coffee in one take. This is some good coffee, by the way, you got here in the shop. So thank you. Cheers to that. I'm looking forward to getting out on the trail, and I know all the viewers are going to appreciate all the knowledge you just dropped. So thank you, brother. Look forward to seeing you out. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with us for this episode of Coffee in One Take. Until next time, we'll see you out on the trail.